Well, thank you for being here, Jason. Welcome to the future of software and our discussion on how AI is reshaping the software development lifecycle. Thanks everyone for joining, and hopefully you're enjoying the summit even though it is a rainy day today. You get one of our 10 days of rain in LA, so consider yourselves blessed. But thank you so much for being here, and would love to just kick off by understanding a little bit more about your background. You have been in software development for quite a while, done some amazing things. Just would love to understand a little more about how you met ISO, your co-founder, what inspired Poolside, and how that's shaped by your background.
Certainly. So my background, outside of Poolside, I was the CTO at GitHub for 4 years. So 2 years pre-acquisition by Microsoft, 2 years post, which is where I met my co-founder. Come back to that in a second. Before GitHub was the same thing at Heroku, which is a platform as a service now owned by Salesforce. And before that, the same thing at Canonical, the people who make Ubuntu Linux. So I was directly responsible for all aspects of Ubuntu for 5 years. Which is, I guess another way to say it is I'm very useless in a desert island scenario and would not last long, but the world values software. But in 2017, I joined GitHub as a CTO. And I met my co-founder there because he was building one of the world's first AI for software, AI on source code companies. This is before Transformers or the attention paper. So in many ways, it was just too early, but we kind of bonded over the idea of neural networks and their applicability to software. And then post-acquisition in the office of the CTO, we did go on to incubate GitHub Copilot, but under a very different mandate.
Awesome. And so I think, obviously things have progressed really quickly over the past couple of years with the advent of Gen AI. And in general, right, the race for AGI.
Yep.
And so you guys are taking a little bit of a unique approach to that. Do you mind sharing more about that?
Sure. So broadly speaking, we are an AGI company. We're in the same space as you might think about as OpenAI or Anthropic or XAI or anybody who has a stated mission of saying intelligence on compute effectively. That's what ours is as well. We believe that we have a different pathway to it. I think if you look at the way that the market is shaping up so far, it's basically take the internet, compress it down into a neural network, and scale up as many computers as you possibly can to these giant compute clusters. Our approach has always been, you can see this too, if you go to poolside.ai/vision, our approach is basically stated that the pathway to AGI runs through software for very technical reasons. And one of those technical reasons is what we call reinforcement learning via code execution feedback. Basically, it's AlphaGo, AlphaZero applied to software, which is largely a deterministic system, meaning that the computational outputs can be reasoned about. And we use that to advance software in a pace that is different than what you would might traditionally say is scaling up compute. So it's not just a pure brute force approach, which is largely what most people are doing these days. However, DeepSeek has shown that reinforcement learning can be done at scale, and a lot of people are starting to adapt.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about, you guys are building software-specific model, right? And I think, for those who maybe aren't as deep within software development, and how should they understand why that's important to have software-specific model, right? And why can't you just simply use a large language model, a more general model like a GPT or a DeepSeek, right? And maybe use RAG or use fine-tuning on top of that. Like, why is software specificity so important?
So you largely can use a general purpose. You're just going to get uneven distribution of results.
Yeah.
So think about it this way. The way that the world has kind of shaped up in neural networks is that we took the internet, we compressed it down, we trained on it. And at one point, we added source code to natural language models. They got smarter. And what we saw from that was, okay, that's interesting. We add source code to language models, they get smarter. And then we applied those same language models to software, because software, interesting, is the best applied use case still of neural networks. If you inventory where AI has product market fit, it's basically software. But our approach, and if you think about what language models are or neural networks, is that, again, the internet of data, and you average out the distribution of that data inside the neural network. A general purpose model essentially is saying we have even distribution of that data. We're not favoring any portion of that data. we're the same thing. We have the same data that OpenAI and Anthropic train on. We're doing the same thing, but we're skewing the distribution towards software and software tasks. Good example of this is that we take care in things that other people just won't care about. So one of those things is we train our model via synthetic data because we generate so much of this data ourselves. We train our model to understand large-scale diffs. What does it mean to diff a code base, or refactors, or legacy code migrations? Because we can do this because we care about that use case. Now, it has two benefits. It benefits the customer and it benefits the use case. But for us, it also benefits going towards AGI. Again, this is our approach because we're generating so much data, it allows us to then say, we're going to reason about this data.
Yep, makes sense. Speaking of DeepSeek, obviously that's been hot topic in the news ever since the announcement. And I am curious because it has reignited, I think, the conversation around open source versus closed source, what the future looks like. I think you have an opinion on this, a pretty strong opinion. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. So how are you thinking about that? And is open source kind of the future for software development?
Well, I would hope so, but we don't have it in artificial intelligence. No one has done open source yet. This is where I become really persnickety, and I feel like I'm swimming against the tide here. And this is from someone who has been in the open source community for the past 25 years, and I've been in the room for writing GPL v2 and v3. But what we have is, at the moment, if you think about what we are deeming as open source, is weights available. Or, if you want to say it a different way, it's binary downloads from a different time. The source code for artificial intelligence is the data these things are trained on. And unless you can inspect the data, you don't have open source. And now I know I'm going to lose this battle. The world's going to move on from this. But it's incredibly important for two constituencies that we get this right. The people who care about what is being said on Twitter don't care about what I'm saying because they just want the lowest cost token. No one cares about what I'm about to say. But two people should very much care about what I'm about to say, and that is every enterprise in the world and every government in the world. Because if you don't have the source code, in this case, the data, you're opening yourself to the exact same thing as you would have if you can't inspect the source code of open source. And remember, I was at Heroku, GitHub, and Canonical. And I can tell you now because I couldn't do it when I was employed there, but what I had to do every day to wake up and make sure China did not inject a backdoor into various parts of the Linux stack. And it was a constant fight. It was a constant fight. And I can guarantee you, without stating anything else, that this is happening on the data side. So what happens with these language models, once you get that data and brought into the model, just Google Andre Karpathy sleeper agent, and you'll be terrified and not sleep for the next couple of weeks. But understand, what we're being sold as open source is not open source. What we're being sold is weights available.
Makes sense. Very interesting. Yeah, no, you can share with this crowd.
Yeah, speaking of which, all of our enterprise or government customers who work with Poolside, we make all of our data available. It's one of our core tenets. We're trying to not hide anything in which we do and say, come and look at it. Now, obviously, it's in a practicality when you're training on 50 trillion tokens, but the point is you got to be able to inspect this.
Makes sense. So you mentioned Twitter. Obviously, there has been a ton of hype around, I think, software development, both real because of its potential impact and the value that can be created pretty quickly with generative AI, but also I think because there are a lot of cool demos out there, and I'm very curious to hear, as someone who's deep in the space, your perspective on where are we at right now, what's actually real, what's working today, and maybe what is Twitter fodder.
Let me lay out what I see, where I see the world is, where I think it's going, where we are.
Yeah.
So, and largely this comes down to language model capabilities. So think about what language models are effectively doing, what they're currently capable of doing, and what they will be able to do. But with the advent of GitHub Copilot, effectively we've entered into dev-led AI assisted, because before we released that, almost every line of code on the planet was human endeavored. But since we did release that, a big portion, if you want to believe the numbers from GitHub, maybe 40% of all lines of code are generated by artificial intelligence. So I believe we're still in dev-led AI assisted, but transitioning quickly to AI-led dev assisted world. But what that basically means still is that we're vast majority developer hands on keyboard, interacting with an AI side by side, whether it be chat or code completion or some other sort of modality, but you're kind of working side by side. Quickly switching to having the AI do longer lived tasks, kind of more interesting, complex things, but still some sort of feedback loop mechanism. Where all of the snake oil is in AI at the moment is anything that says I can go from X to Y. So I can go from idea to running application, largely works in very simple demo-ish sort of ways. Or my favorite one, there's a lot of people out there saying I can migrate COBOL or Fortran or whatever to modern languages. And like, that just does not exist. That is not a thing that these models are capable of doing. What they are capable of doing is assisting developers in that moment. They can still help a developer transition from old code to new code or to migrate and do large scale X, Y's, and Z's, but it's still going to be in some sort of iterative back and forth fashion. But if you want to anthropomorphize this, the next couple of years, we are on the kind of this exponential curve or trajectory of junior developer, mid-level, senior to PM type of arc, but it will be over the next couple of years.
Makes a lot of sense. So if I'm we have a lot of them in the crowd and here at the summit. If I'm an enterprise leader, right? If, for example, I'm leading the engineering org in a Fortune 500 organization, how should I think about investing today in things that are going to up-level my team and keep us ahead of the curve, especially in such a fast-moving space?
Yeah, so the one thing I will say, and previously having those CTO jobs, is that the thing you're after is some stability inside your organization. And the fashion of software changes so rapidly that if you are constantly at the weather vane whim of whatever is happening, you're in trouble. So making those decisions feels herky-jerky. Like today it's X editor, tomorrow it's Y editor, that sort of stuff. So what you have to do is you have to find stuff that basically becomes bedrock for your organization that you can build around. And this is what we always do with enterprise vendors. If you want to think about what Salesforce is, we call these things data systems of record or whatever they are on other sides of the fence. But it's actually probably 10 times more important now for this. And what I think is going to happen over the next couple of years is organizations are going to start to make general purpose AI decisions, domain-specific software as a domain-specific AI decisions, and then very domain-specific like robotics or genomics or whatever, given that. So if I were a CTO, my advice for them would be pick a vendor, pick something that you understand that you can build around in the future, and it becomes incredibly important. Now, the one complexity with enterprises that a lot of folks who care about what happens on Twitter have to consider that other people like those Twitter folks do not have to consider is all the legacy data, all of the internal compliance and regulatory things that are going on inside an enterprise. And that's actually some of the more critical decision points that you're going to have to make.
That makes a ton of sense. And I guess shifting gears a little bit towards thinking more futuristic and future state, you described sort of the path towards autonomy in software development and likened it to sort of L1 to L5, right, with autonomous driving.
Yeah.
Can you, I guess, explain a little bit of where you think we're at today, right, in that landscape, and where you think we evolve over maybe the shorter run and then the longer run as well?
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with autonomy in full self-driving, just the only thing we really need to know is that level 5 is steering wheel out of the car. So the car is fully autonomous and can do whatever you want. If you think about it, it's not that dissimilar in software. That's where the holy grail that everyone's kind of selling at the moment is trying to get to that. But it's a similar arc. We have to kind of go through steering wheel in the car, driver assisted, all that sort of stuff. Now, the key thing here is that software, very specifically, and it's interesting that we brought up the autonomy one because software has the advantage that full self-driving did not have. Full self-driving has to deal with the real world.
Yep.
I don't have to deal with the real world. I have to deal with these things, which are the perfect simulatable environments. So because of that, I can speed run through those various phases. Why Tesla and Waymo are interesting is, in Tesla in particular, they put cars on the road to collect data to bring back to an approximator. They call it a simulator, but it's more of a real-world approximator environment. I don't have to build any of that stuff. It's the perfect simulator environment. So because of that, we get to speed run through it. but we're still at level 3 right now. We're not hands the steering wheel out of the car yet, and we won't be for another couple of years. But it'll happen much faster than it happened for full self-driving.
So how, as we get there, right, let's say, as we reach full autonomy, what does that mean, right, for general organizations as they think through how they think about software development? What are the broader implications?
Well, the broader implications are is that, and it's probably worth a deeper dive into my beliefs and worldviews about what's happening here, but I'll just state the following for pre-context here. One is, I think neural networks are the most important digital technology of our lifetime. Nothing else will actually come close when we have these things at scale and at full implementation. 2, humans are bad at interpreting exponentials, and we're living on an exponential for intelligence on compute. We're going through it faster than any of us in the space actually anticipated, and all of us at the frontier labs, so OpenAI, Anthropic, myself, or Elon, or whatever, are seeing the same data. And the third, and this is what the answer to your question is, my belief is that in the next 3 years, we're basically going to hit artificial intelligence that's capable of taking on mean economic known work. Meaning, if people can work behind a screen, artificial intelligence is going to be able to do probably the average of that work, whether it be on the general purpose on accounting or all the chat bots that you would have for support and whatnot. Yep. And then the software, again, the average known economic unit of work is going to be able to be done by an AI. Now, that doesn't mean it will be done because the long tail of adoption is always true, but it's capable of being done. And then we're in a very different world all of a sudden.
What does that mean for the developer?
So I think the developer arc looks like this. The developer arc, you're always going to end up in 2 different domains. So one is more people are going to develop software. Yes, 100% that's true. 8 billion people on the planet will be able to do something. And that something, again, will be unevenly distributed, just like everything in life is always unevenly distributed. But you'll be able to create something, particularly low complexity software or like limited interaction software. And as you get better, you'll be able to do more. And then you also have people who go down a different path and they still use AI, but they're still like the people who are developing the on-system chip software for flight simulators or computational fluid dynamics or Linux kernels and stuff like that. That's interesting. 8 billion people it's a pretty nice TAM to go after and all that sort of stuff. But really the interaction is going to change. And what's going to happen, particularly for the enterprises, is that they will, the way I heard this stated that I liked is, you'll basically find this mythical island with infinite interns available to you. And at that point, you'll have humans inside your organization that are dealing with effectively robots. And the number of humans who are interacting with a number of robots will never be skewed towards the humans in that way. So that means your interactions look very different. So the way I think about this is at some point here very soon, you're going to have artificial intelligence available to you. You're going to have a dial, and you're just going to adjust the dial to say, how many robots do I want running around my organization doing something? And then if you have 10,000 developers, they might be interacting with hundreds of millions or billions of robots running around doing stuff. And so it's a coordination problem. So that's when we transition from the developer's hands-on keyboard as production of X to the basically the associated moving around of the blocks of X. So the other way I like to say this, because people like to ask me, what does it mean for a developer in the future? And I'll say 2 things. So one is, first, your interaction with the job will change. If you get your identity out of understanding all the APIs of something, like you understand the Java API better than anybody else on the planet, that's likely gone. This system will know how to do that, not just a little bit better, infinity better than you. But it doesn't mean that other things that make you unique and interesting go away. So the taste, judgment, discernment, knowledge, coordination efforts, the interpretation of the result, all that sort of stuff will still exist. But those also will change.
So it might actually make the job more appealing in a lot of ways. I think that was...
Well, it's going to attract a different type of person, I think, too.
Yeah.
I always like to state that there's effectively 2 types of developers in the world. Now, there's never 2 of anything, but it's easy for conversation. But if you take 2 people, there's people who want to go after a problem and solve that problem and build a product. That's one side of the fence. Then there's another side of the fence where there's a developer who wants to chase a stack trace and like really solve a puzzle and go deep. There's going to be worlds for both of these people still. But the people who want to go solve that problem are now going to have unbounded resource available to them. And there's not going to be limited blocks anymore. And interesting, people want to chase a stack trace will still have that problem set available to them, but the tools available to interpret the stack trace are no longer their own puzzle building abilities. Those AIs will do that, again, better.
Interesting, very interesting. So I guess as you think about this world, right, that you've described, what would you say are the biggest challenges, right, as you think from an enterprise perspective about transitioning from where we are today to that world, right? What are sort of the biggest roadblocks that you
for enterprises specifically?
Yeah, for enterprise, specifically, I would say.
I would say that largely whenever you're going through sort of these epochal changes that we're under at the moment, I think separating fact from reality and fiction is the real thing. Like, what is actually real? What is kind of snake oil? What is future versus now? All that sort of stuff. And then again, the fashion of software. What matters versus what matters right now. Yep. And I think all those things kind of combine for largely danger territory. And what I mean by that is like CIOs and CTOs have always had the I'm going to get fired for making this decision type of decision sets. But now there's a lot of I make this decision, I get fired in a year. Very, 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 there's a lot of those types of decisions all of a sudden. And they have to do not just with the choice of vendor, but it's also with what are the security and compliance issues here. Because remember, you're marrying your data, your internal data with these systems, and not everybody, there's a lot of people who are asking enterprises to make the devil's trade of, hey, I want to give you AI, but you got to give me your data in some fashion or form, which is probably the biggest I'll get fired, possibly go to jail decision out there right now.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's always, I think, talking earlier with folks, right, just around the summit, I think there's a belief that the technology will be there perhaps before the organization is ready to fully embrace it, and that the actual uptick will be slower because of all of these concerns.
Yeah, I do think that there's a longer tail of adoption here. I think that the technology will get there quicker than some of the folks can adopt it.
Yep.
Because it comes down to the humans absorbing these things always.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. All right, well, I'm going to ask you, I know we're coming up on the end here, but I'm going to ask you to put on your long-term thinking hat and pull out the crystal ball, because if you're right, you'll look like a genius, and if you're wrong, everyone will forget it by next year. So always a low stakes, a final predictive. But I guess on a broader scale, what are your predictions for how Gen AI really is transformative over the next few years in ways that maybe we're not anticipating or not thinking about? It can be software related or just related to enterprise in general.
I think the most common held belief amongst my peers in this space, and the one I also think about on a regular basis, is that the types of work that these things are going to do get broken into known economic unit, as I mentioned before, or known compute unit, depending on how you want to talk about it, or unknown compute unit. And the unknown compute unit is the one that's fascinating to myself personally, because I think the known economic one is the ones that are going to make all of these, the OpenAIs, Anthropics, X's, and myself, like these mega companies. That's great. That's always fun. But the unknown economic one is that has societal impact. Like, what does it mean when you apply these things to cancer, or again, computational fluid dynamics, or genomics, or whatever, and we just kind of let them explore? Again, going back to what reinforcement learning is all about, or if you have not read it, I recommend you do read Richard Sutton's tiny little essay called The Bitter Lesson. If we apply more computational search to these domains, what is the impact going to be? I think that's what most people are very interested in. I think we all believe that the compression of learning in those types of spaces is going to be 1,000-fold. I mean, the other side of that fence is that we advance society really quickly. But if you really want to ask like a concrete thing here is that I do think that enterprises basically are going to have, in about 3 years' time, a real choice, which is, do I want to go after these new markets, largely done by artificial intelligence, these markets? I'm going to basically bring up a unit of X amount of people, but they're augmented in a way with artificial intelligence. that makes them feel 10x bigger. And then the way that organizations are structured looks very, very different all of a sudden.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sharing more about Poolside and for opining, given your expertise and background on the future of software. So thank you all for joining.
Thanks, everybody.